All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. So if you want to learn about headcount forecasting, you are in the right place. Today, we're going to be talking all about how to take those insights and learnings from the first half of the year and apply them to the second half. I'm not an expert by any means in this topic, so really excited to hear from Joe and Eric here. So today's session is put on by these four lovely organizations you see on your screen right now. So Talent Collective, that's the community that I run. We are a membership community for women in the talent acquisition space. We come together for different events, both in person all over the US and Canada. And then we put on a lot of other virtual programming, including sessions just like this and more. We've got a mentorship program and a whole slew of other really great programs for women in TA. We also have Unicorn Talent. Eric was just filling everyone in about Unicorn Talent, but there are a ton of tools that are tailored just for TA on their website. So definitely would love for everyone to check them out and go try to get access to all of these great tools. And then Purple. So Purple is all about peer-to-peer learning for recruiters, courses and workshops and a bunch of other resources. And Joe leads up that community. And then we have Headcount 365, which is a headcount management platform. So Eric is the go-to for Headcount 365.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's see here. Some community leaders.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce myself real quick and then pass it over to Joe to introduce himself. So my name is Krista, and as I mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Talent Collective. I have over 17 years of TA experience, ranging from agency to building startups, and now I run Talent Collective. I also do some consulting and recruiting as well. So I'm still really in the industry and always wanting to learn best practices. So really excited to have everyone here. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Well, thanks, Krista. So, hey everyone, I'm Joe, based over in London. I run a company called Purple. As Krista mentioned, we're a peer-to-peer learning platform. A lot of our content is very IC focused and takes people from junior, mid to senior level IC to pushing towards talent leadership. My background is recruiting for high growth tech companies, mainly in Berlin, but across Europe. A lot of my experience was for companies who are maybe less mature on some of these topics. So I always find it really interesting to listen to Eric, who has some experience doing this at some quite big companies and get that perspective. And yeah, a bit late here in London, so happy to give up my evening when it's with Eric. So let's dive in.
Excellent. And I'm Eric. I, like Joe said, have done this job and a lot of headcount forecasting at companies like Bird Scooters, Uber, Clutter, and then I did Unicorn as a consulting business for Insight mainly, but other companies. And now I run Headcount 365, which takes all of the concepts that we'll see today and enhances them using software over spreadsheets. So just think about a super program spreadsheet. And what we're going through today is the checklist that's available on Unicorn. So if you pop over to Unicorn Talent and just go to downloads and hit the reforecasting checklist, or I think it might be in the Knowledge Center about how to reforecast headcount, then you can follow along and then use this as you go through your individual process. All the information's in here as well, but if you're going through the process, I always find that it's super helpful that you use this follow along. So we're going to cover 5 things today. The one, understanding the drivers of a reforecast. So people reforecast for many different reasons. We'll cover why and what that does to your headcount forecast. 2, how do you deliver the context of recruiting performance? Number 3 is the missed target analysis. This is the hardest one to do, and having an objective look at recruiting performance through the executive lens will help you not only better reforecast headcount for the end of the year, but it will give you credibility as a talent leader because you are able to objectively measure things that have gone poorly and then make a plan to fix them and distribute the accountability for those missed targets outside of just the funnel or recruiter performance. Then we'll show you a capacity demand forecast. We have one for download as well on Unicorn, and then we'll show the concepts to building hiring team requirements as you build your H2 reforecast. So we'll cover all of that in this call. If you have any questions about any of the sections, fire away in the chat. Krista and Joe will be taking a look, and there's, like I said, some other questions that we've had from some previous sessions. Well, we'll just get started with number one, understanding the drivers of your reforecast. And what you'll notice is there's different reasons why companies will change their headcount. And the first step of credibility as a TA leader is knowing why it's happening. You don't want to go into a meeting where you're cutting gung-ho about adding more recruiters or spending more money on tools if you're cutting headcount, and that's the reason for the reforecast. And so sometimes companies will lose an account or gain an account. That's a reason to add or change headcount. Sometimes you'll take a different direction. Many companies that are kind of like in that midpoint of the parabola are refocusing towards AI as everything shifts. And so you're going to see a lot of different product changes as well. You might need to reforecast headcount because recruiting is missing performance, which is not the best way to go in, but you need to know how to handle it. And so, if you've overstated your recruiting capacity, or maybe your hiring managers aren't showing up for the process in the way that you need, you have to be able to articulate it. Financial changes are essentially when a company sets different goals from a FP&A perspective, and they're going to either add or constrain headcount. This could be an unlock or, like I said, a cut. Productivity is a hot topic. I know Joe is actually running a class on productivity within recruiting coming up. Joe, when are you doing that?
TBC, but soon.
To BC. Okay, so look out if you guys aren't following Purple. There'll be I saw a class on mastering AI, and then some future lessons on how to like maximize some of the tools that exist today. There's also a company called Stacked.tech. It's run by a woman named Jessie, and she reviews all the HR tools that are out and about, regardless of what category of HR. She's kind of building that database for HR tools. I really like her take there. Anyway, productivity is going to be a big shift in how folks think about headcount. Like if you search, I always like, one of the main things you do when you're running a company is try to engage with people on LinkedIn. So I search headcount, and like half of the posts are about gaining efficiency without adding headcount, right? And so everyone's going to start to say like, how many more hires can you make, or how much more code can you write, or what more products can you release without adding headcount, or how do I reshape either the IC to production ratio or the IC to manager ratio by using some form of automation to increase the number of employees a manager can have, or increase the number of production. So that's probably going to be the biggest driver for a lot of companies in the next 5 years. That's going to shift headcount reforecast, but we'll cover it with equal scrutiny here. And the last one's business direction. That might be a product or financial reforecast, but if it's something outside of that, then you're going to see that. And so the main thing I cover with TA folks is like, know the difference between what people are going to be asking you. If you're growing and expanding, everyone's going to be excited about investments. And there's like this rallying idea of like, let's unblock ourselves by investing in recruiting. And this is where you'll have the most freedom to ask for more recruiters. We'll talk about in the capacity demand forecast, but you'll also have the opportunity to change hiring manager behavior. So I think an underrated thing that I try to solve with headcount, what I try to solve with, even what made me successful as an internal leader or as a consultant, is identifying where the non-funnel and non-recruiting blockers are in my headcount process. So that could be interviewers being available or segmenting enough time to even make the hires, or getting your intake sessions, your interview rubrics figured out, and having your hiring managers go from I've requested a headcount to I've given you all the materials to start recruiting, and reducing that time. So there's a lot of positivity in a growth and expansion from a TA perspective. And so if you're growing your headcount because your business is scaling, know the difference. And that's the easiest one. Flat headcount is a lot about efficiency. So you're going to get, if no one else can grow their headcount, investing in a TA aspect is going to be much more difficult than anything else that someone can directly correlate to. So there's like direct correlation to revenue and indirect correlation to revenue. I am not a recruiting as a cost center type of person, but I understand that we are an indirect revenue source versus sellers being maybe a direct revenue source. So focusing on efficiency, and this is where you're going to look at production efficiency, and you're going to look at underperformance and try to do more with the team that you have now. In a headcount reduction, you're going to be looking at cost control and efficiency. So figuring out what your ROI is, what your value is, being able to articulate that and understand, where you're able to cut in a reasonable time frame. So one of the biggest things that I see in an H2 reforecast specifically is, we had high demand at the beginning of the year, our whole hiring, and then in H2 we slow it down, so we don't need all those recruiters, and then in H1 we need to ramp it back up again. So year over year headcount tracking is going to be extremely important if you're a cyclical business. If you're coming from retail or I'm trying to think, I don't know, selling convertibles in the summer. I don't know what other things that you'll do, but if you have a cyclical nature to your business, it's the natural corporate instinct to slash recruiting teams when there isn't demand right in front of my face. So that's probably the number one thing that you need to be active against. So I'll pause here. I don't know if there's any questions from the crowd, if you have anything coming through the chat, but we'll move on to number 2 shortly. Any questions here? What are you seeing, Joe, Krista?
Yeah, nothing in the chat. Joy says consulting is cyclical too, always changing. Agree. We can do a question from the community, which is about where do I get the info for the reforecasting context?
Yes. Okay. So very popular. If you're a TA leader and you don't have executive exposure, you might not have the context. So your CHRO or your FP&A leader is going to be able to tell you most of what's going on. So having a good relationship with either your CHRO or an FP&A business partner to get the inside scoop on what's actually happening behind the scenes. You'll have to leave it to your own management judgment to figure out how to bring that up in the things that you're doing. But yeah, those are the 2 kind of sources of information from, why are we reforecasting this headcount? All right, number 2. Okay, so delivering the context of recruiting impact, right? So when someone's making an H2 reforecast, the thing that they're wondering in their mind, or not, equally as impactful is, can recruiting even do this? Right? So I've seen H2 reforecasts that don't go well because everyone just assumes they don't take into consideration the recruiting capacity, the time to fill, the interviewer availability, and you have like a gung-ho FP&A leader who is like, all right, we need all these sales hires to start August 1st. And it's like, all right, we could, but let's actually dive into whether or not it's possible so that we, can paint a realistic revenue or OpEx forecast. So these are the things that I found to be super impactful in terms of like, how did the recruiting team perform in H1 and what do we expect to see happen in H2 given given the demand? So 1, did recruiting meet the capacity of what you've asked of the recruiters in H1? So if you asked the recruiters to fill 20 and they filled 20, then they've met the capacity. Now the second one is recruiting met demand. If the business asked for 22 and the recruiters filled 20, they met capacity, but they missed demand, which as a talent leader means you are balancing the hiring manager who says, I needed 22 and you didn't fill that, with, I was a recruiting leader and I said you could fill 20. So you've met my goals as a recruiting leader, but you've missed the demand goals. And as a TA leader, this is 99% of managing the executive meeting, is the expectation around performance. Is the business thought something was going to happen, the recruiting team thought something else was going to happen, and you need to articulate the difference between what is good recruiting performance versus what the business demanded. And that will be extremely clear as we continue on through like managing missed targets and why those missed targets happen. On-time hires is about whether or not the start date that you had planned to hit was hit. Hires on budget could mean either the salary that you intended to pay, the equity you intended to pay, or agency spend. Titles levels variance is this is more prevalent in scale-ups without a defined compensation team or a fixed offer process, but we see a lot of empire building in scale-ups. So I usually do show of hands in this group, a lot of cameras off, but there are folks who are in smaller companies where they have that one manager who hires everybody at a director level. It doesn't, they could be a coordinator to an actual director, and they're just empire building. And that does a number of different things to your compensation, to your recruiting capacity, to your budget, but the title and level variance will get you. I have a whole thing on that as far as like building good recruiting culture, but we'll save that for another webinar. And then the last one is agency budget met. So a lot of folks see agencies as a perceived incompetence by the recruiting team. If you map it correctly, then you should see it as a supplement to your recruiting capacity, and you can then articulate with your finance team the budget impact agencies versus hiring a full-time internal recruiter. And so anyone who wants to know how I present recruiting context, I have a QBR. There's like 8 slides. It has a format to how you go through presenting, whether you're doing a reforecast or not. The QBR will walk you through how I present all of this information to an executive team. I've taken out a couple of select slides so that you can see them today, but we'll send out those documents afterwards. So capacity demand actuals is where I made my career. This is why people liked the work that I did. Is I, over a period of time, could tell you what did you expect to happen versus what actually happened, and show you where the variance came and why that variance existed. And when I do that, it distributes accountability across recruiters, hiring managers, and the business alike. And we'll get in that a little bit later on in the presentation. But this is an example, right? What did you initially demand of me? And you can see in this particular example, 25 a month. Well, what the business actually did was 40 in the first month, and then 20, and then 15. It's the same amount of hires. So if you look at me and you say, like, oh, you could have produced 75 hires, but you didn't, or you were late. Well, this tells the real story of like, oh, of course 15 were late. We were not, we were front loaded, and you're going to see that in our forecast. So we were actually on plan. So this is kind of one of the main, when you're talking to the business or the executive team, or you're managing a reforecast, what did you want me to do versus what did I have the capacity to do is how I make the plan. The actuals of what happened is how I tell the story of variance. And so this is extremely important. I've spent uh, a lot of engineering hours to enhance this functionality in Headcount 365 so that I can tell a story not only quarter over quarter, but year over year, and show you things like how many times did you shuffle a roll, or how many times did you miss something that you should have hit, and build a little bit more detail in. But if you're producing something like this in an executive meeting, they'll be way more impressed than if you don't produce something like that. And this is kind of one of the focuses of the software, but something that you could easily do in spreadsheets as you kind of learn about what's happening. So this is in the QBR. Definitely use this. It got me a lot of accolade in my career. The next one is hires on time. This is how I speak to finance specifically. They have, yeah, if I'm going to pay somebody $365 a year and finance wants them to start on February 1st, then that's, what is that? $335 I'm going to pay them instead of $365, right? And if that person generates revenue and they're expecting them to generate, $2 a day of revenue, then that's $60 of revenue and $30 of cost. And so if I'm not hiring people on time, they can't get their revenue or their budgets on time. So they have a whole group of their OPEX that's a slush fund. They might tell you about it, they might not tell you about it. And there's 2 types of finance teams. The finance team who tells you about it and they're managing off this slush fund, and that's how people make their offers above band, or I want to change this role and move it here, move it back. They're doing it out of that slush fund, and you guys have a relationship around like, are we on budget or not? And that's one type of finance team. Another type of finance team is we don't tell anybody about it. We know the recruiting team's not going to miss, and we're going to bank the savings anyway. You know which finance team that you have. They both work. If I'm if I'm an investor, a board member, a shareholder, they're both ways to do it. They have different interactions with your hiring team. Like your hiring team has expectations of different people, and it creates, a certain culture you'll have to manage. It is what it is. But hires on time, if you can tell, I've hit this, hiring those 75 roles, if we go back a slide, but I hired all the easy roles from March 1st and all the hard roles from January last, that's that's where the story is missing, right? So the hires on time report, gives you this idea of like, did we have the most impactful roles, whether it's by priority, by budget, by level, however you want to do it. That's going to give you that story about whether or not that OpEx or revenue starts on time. So you have a CRO who's worried about your sales plan. You have a engineering leader who couldn't deliver product and they start to blame recruiting. This is where you can kind of defend yourself and see what's happening. And so again, in the QBR, the headcount software tries to give you more context. So we have an activity feed on every requisition that gives you the context of like who did the change and why did they do the change, and you can investigate whether or not that this missed hire was, your fault or someone else's fault, or maybe you're not assigning blame, you're just trying to get to the root cause. The last thing's hires on budget. Oh, typo. I'm sorry. Anyway, hires on budget. This is what your finance team is going to care about. This is how they're going to make all of their future forecasts. So as you make either your H2 reforecast or you do it for 2026, they're going to be looking at budget performance, and they're going to be having a couple of conversations. One, what is the conversation I need to have with the comp team? And two, what is the conversation I need to have with the hiring team? So hires off budget that are consistent is a comp investigation. So if I had budgeted 50K for an inside sales rep and I've hired the last 20 of them at 65K, not only does that produce, 15K times 20, 300,000 of variance, that is a comp issue that can be reforecasted with your comp team. Now, if I have a hiring manager who's just going over budget and it correlates to a job title or a level change or something else, then that's a hiring manager conversation about responsible use of budget. The other thing that you may or may not be able to capture in a spreadsheet, if you look at our capacity demand forecast, which I will provide a link in a later slide, there's a variance tab that shows you annualized variance, but there's a big difference between pro rata and annualized. So if I am a hiring manager and I take that role from December and I bring it up to June, I'm adding 6 months of budget. And there's a lot of those pro rata changes that don't necessarily get captured in a generalized variance report. So I always say this in all my LinkedIn posts, or like if I'm trying to be like kitschy when I market, is like hiring managers don't care. It's not their job. They want who they want. They don't care about the cost of employment when they split a role. They don't care about the start date when they combine a role, move it. They don't care. You have two $50,000 roles. I want one $100,000 role. Make it happen. And if it doesn't happen, I make noise because that's what makes me a good hiring manager or whatever, right? And so as a recruiting leader, I never try to get in their zone about whether or not they're right or wrong. I try to present the information and then make a plan with finance and then try to distribute that responsibility to an FP&A person so that they can go about kind of managing the financial expectations with that customer. And again, as I talk about those two types of finance teams, that's what you have to, see and figure out. The recruiting context is the changes to the recruiting workload that have impacted your ability to meet demand. So the number one thing that I can track all changes in a spreadsheet. The reason why I made Headcount 365 is I wanted to know when the changes happen. So if someone changes something while I'm working on it, it's going to extend the time of fill. And so if I'm working on something and someone midway through the process or at offer says, "Oh, I want to do something different," the people that I was talking to had a whole other context that changed. So now it's going to extend that time to fill. So being able to understand when things change, who's changing them, and what the change is, the number of those critical changes. So for this group, if you're not using a system like Headcount 365 and you have a spreadsheet, I had a column that said like critical changes. And if there's a critical change means someone changed something and it impacted the recruiting ability, then I'm just ticking that next to a hiring manager, and then I can run like a pivot table, like how many critical changes that hiring manager make. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll get you most of the way there. And that's the type of stuff that helps you distribute accountability back to hiring managers for their impact on recruiting context. So I'll pause here. Download the QBR. That's how I present, especially when I'm doing a forecast. But any questions on, I see the chat, but it's too small for my eyes. I think I'm getting old.
All we had in the chat was a comment from Craig, which I found quite funny, which was these variances often disappear to amnesia, which I absolutely agree they do. Like particularly hiring manager changes. Like in my world, I've barely ever seen that being tracked. So love that that's such a key part of both your spreadsheet template and the software, right?
Yeah, and Joe has a great class on being a talent partner, right? So like when you're a TA leader and you are managing these hiring managers who get the amnesia, it's you know, I I made the software to try to like get all this information in one place, but a lot of it is still how does that recruiting leader form a relationship to build these concepts into your hiring managers so that they understand the impact of their behavior before they do it? Because I've been in 1,000 recruiting meetings, and that's probably not an exaggeration. It's probably closer to like 800. Nonetheless, everyone forgets their impact. When it comes down to, hey, hiring manager, you didn't hit your goal, they always forget. And that's kind of, you'll navigate that.
Craig just asked a follow-up question on that actually. What's the rubric for establishing change impact measured by time?
So what is the rubric for establishing change impact measured by time? Okay, so there are changes that are going to have a direct influence over your time to fill, which is changing a start date. And there are going to be things that have an indirect influence over your time to fill, which is a change either while the recruiter was working on it or during an offer period. Now, I have an article that I'll send out with this called Time to Fill is a Superpower, right? I categorize time to fill as 4 different zones. How long does it take for a net new requisition to get approved and to like be something on the plan? Then how long does it take for the recruiting team to prep all of the information and get it started? So I can request a role and then I need to do an intake session, interview rubric, job description, process, whatever other trainings, right? That's a second period of time. Then I have how long does it take to find the person, have them accept an offer, and then how long does it take for somebody to quit their job and start a new one? So for my global TA leaders here, you're going to have something in Berlin or any EMEA country is going to have a much longer time to hire, or excuse me, time to fill than an American country, which has a 2 week notice period versus a 6 week or a 3 month notice period out there. And so, thank you, Joe. So, any change that's going to directly impact, there's a start date change. A start date is tracked by, I'm still figuring out when people do that. And then two, an indirect impact is when somebody makes a change while I'm working on something and or they make a critical change to a requisition at any point post publishing in your ATS, which could be a level or a title change. And then we might need to like re-intake the role or rewrite a job description if they want to up level it or give it a management title, etc. And those changes sometimes happen as their fault. So think about this as regretted and unregretted. We're getting too technical. I could go in for days on this, but unregretted, regretted, there's like intentional or unintentional. So sometimes you hire someone, you went over a budget, you got to download for another role that's currently being recruited for. You can track this context too, because the worst thing is trying to then distribute accountability appropriately and then having the wrong reason for that hiring manager making that change. And now you're in this fight over like, what are the specific nuances? And so I do a whole how to run a QBR webinar. We'll run one of those later in the year. But essentially, you got to stay out of that conversation and try to drive like large scale trends in this idea. All right, let me see. Can we share more about the proactive if-then scenario planning versus reactive sprints? I would say scenario planning is its own thing. There's going to be times like in an H2 reforecast, you're going to have multiple people submitting scenarios to like a line leader who then needs to approve. And we'll do something separate. Maybe we could do something with, either one of these communities are independent on scenario planning. What's my preference for changing recs? Let's say a recruiter who has worked a senior rec for 4 weeks and then it's leveled up to staff and then they're back to square one. Are we archiving the original and creating? Okay, so in a spreadsheet based plan, it's going to come down to your rec ID. So I hope if you're in your tracking, so if you look at the capacity demand forecast that's available on Unicorn, every ID that's attached to a line or to a row to a job should match up with your finance forecast. So you should keep that ID the same. And if you're pushing that ID to your ATS or tracking it in some sort of way, you should keep the ID the same so that the finance team knows that that ID had a change in these parameters. You should also track that on that same requisition, the change of the level or the title, so your HR team knows that a hiring manager is making a change to that level. And so depending on your tracking, whether you're manual on a spreadsheet or automated with something like Headcount 365, that ID is your source of truth. And then those changes get tagged to that unique identifier so that you can tell the story of that requisition. All right, let's see. Okay, so let's look at missed targets. How are we doing on time? I can't see. 1:30, are we about halfway through?
25 minutes to go.
Okay, excellent. All right, we're cruising. All right, putting questions on the other screen. Missed targets. All right, I believe I'm gonna clip this. I'm gonna start again. I'm gonna clip this for like a short. I'm gonna put some subtitles on and everything. Ready? Okay. I think that a missed target in recruiting is one of four things. The funnel didn't perform, the recruiting team didn't perform, the hiring managers didn't contribute, or the forecast was wrong. So one of those four things is the reason, or a combination, that you are missing your targets. Not, I've worked in companies, and part of the reason I made Headcount 365 was there's more to the story or the service of funnels and pass-through rates and volume. And I was tired of dealing with executives who were like, how many hires do we make? All right, let's pump top of funnel. And like, that's how we increase hiring. So anyway, those are the four reasons I think. So funnel conversion is like, did I not get enough at the top? Is there time or conversion rate blockers within the funnel? Are people not showing up to interviews? Are they not filling out their scorecards? Are we not getting offers out fast enough? So I have an article on Unicorn called The Science of the Recruiting Funnel that shows each section, its target conversion rate, um, and like what is the remedy for each one of those? Like how would I train someone to get better and to improve those conversion rates? And that's what I would focus on there. From a recruiting team performance perspective, it goes back to that concept of capacity versus demand. You asked me to fill 20, I filled 20. If you asked for 22, I still performed. And you have to have that clear distinction. And so if the team wants to increase capacity, they can increase capacity. Hiring team performance is all of your hiring manager behaviors. Are they making changes while you're working on things? Are they showing up to interviews, filling out scorecards? If they're not, they're impacting your ability to meet demand. And lastly, the headcount forecast accuracy. This is how many changes happened to the plan, and did the company do what the company asked you to do? I don't know how many TA leaders we have on here that have had a plan that was given to them at the beginning of the half or the year that was actually the plan the whole year. I don't think I've met someone who's had that. If that's you, reach out to me. I need to do an interview. We'll do a podcast. I need to like learn from you. How did you make that happen? It's never happened to me before in my life. And that could just be the difference in expected backfills for folks who are either on stagnant or flat headcount plans. So anyway, understanding your missed targets is a kind of critical issue of what's going on with the service of recruiting. So like whenever I'm a TA leader and I'm in a QBR, I'm in a reforecast, I am talking about you business have purchased service of recruiting. I am the leader of that service, and I will help guide your inputs to creating a more productive or efficient service. But I am the shepherd of metrics that help you interact with us better, and it is a team sport. So again, here's some details here. I won't go through it twice. Any questions, anything on missed targets that I'm missing? Let me bring the chat to the front. No Q&As? All right. Oh, I blocked everyone's face with the chat. That's on me. Okay. We're back. The last one. All right. So now it's about building the forecast, right? And so now that you know what's happened in H1, we understand what we were able to produce. So if you asked 100 and we produced 100, did we produce it on time? Did we have enough capacity? One of the things that is very difficult to articulate because it's custom to every company is the relationship of historic to future. So if for some, and backfill is the easiest one, so I'll use that as the example. So if I had the recruiting capacity to fill 50 and I had 40 net new and a plan for 10 backfill, how did the 10 change, and do I expect that to happen again? So today I would say static backfill rates are what people use. So a certain percent attrition, but if you have like sellers or if you're a company that gives out equity, people leave on a schedule, right? Sometimes people wait for their bonus, they wait for their commission, they wait for their equity to vest, then they leave. So mapping your spikes in attrition is kind of like how I would then predict whether or not I'm going to see the same amount of attrition from H1 to H2. But using a capacity demand forecast, you're going to then map whatever you're asking in H2, and you're going to start to overlay those learnings on top of that capacity demand forecast. I'll show you what that looks like in a sec. Time to fill. This is the same thing that I was talking about earlier. Know those 4 sections. Joe put the article in the chat, but those 4 sections are kind of like where you're going to make investments in process to reduce the amount of time it takes for something to happen. And knowing the difference between what time a recruiter control versus what time the business controls is how you're going to navigate the forecast. We'll soon be coming out with a calculator here. So hiring manager requirements. So the number one thing that I've seen go bad with a forecast when the recruiting team is staffed to capacity is nobody thought about how much time it takes of a hiring manager's life to do the interviews that they themselves are asking for. So I'll give you an example. Again, we'll do a show of hands at a different time, but some of you have a 7 to 9 step engineering interview process. It's like recruiter screen, hiring manager screen, code, pair programming, interview 1, 2, 3, pre-offer, right? That's an hour per section of hiring manager time. So if you have one hiring manager who works 40 hours a week writing code, they're going to be doing at the conversion rates of your funnel that many hours of investment. So to get one hire, if it takes, one offer to go out, if you're perfect, normally not the case, right? 3 team interviews, 6 hiring manager screens, you can start to do the math of how much time each interviewer is going to need to invest in your process. So I've been in companies where they'll be like, all right, we're ready to go. And I'll look at the size of the team interviewing and I'll look at the demand that team's asking for. And I'm just saying to myself, you're not going to do your job. You're never going to write code again. And all you're going to do is interview. You still won't hit the plan. And so knowing your hiring manager requirements, will soon come out with a calculator. I'm sure some of you have it. ChatGPT is great for this. Hopefully it doesn't make Unicorn obsolete, but nonetheless, know your funnel conversion rates, know how much interviewers you have, and then do the math on how much time it's going to take for those folks to even make that commitment. And then you can start to bring that to every executive meeting or quarterly business review as a metric to say, here's how our interviewers performed against the required time. And then lastly, agency, someone laughed. It works. It definitely works. Anyway, the agency budget, when you map your capacity demand, maybe I'll go to the next one here. So as I talk, here's the link to go download it, get it. It does work. Again, this was another I started Headcount 365 originally as this tool. And then we expanded from there into all headcount. But this was so successful that I made a software out of it, and we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I forget what I was saying. Oh, agency budget. When you map capacity versus demand, you're going to see clear areas where you don't have enough capacity. That is a good way to advocate for another recruiter, if you could justify the cost, a contractor, or a agent. Now, this capacity demand forecast is a simple, meaning I'm not taking into account the ramp time of somebody or the time to fill by location. We're giving broad estimates of capacity versus demand for the purposes of articulating recruiting capacity during a reforecast. But that's the difference between this and Headcount 365. So if you download this tool, what you'll see is we pivot the data from your headcount data tab to produce this forecast where you can see by individual recruiter like the demand that's being asked of them versus the capacity that they have to do the recruiting. And you can see, even though they're plus 33 capacity, they're gonna have a rough month. Especially, sorry, Perry Jefferson, you're gonna just have a rough month. Carolyn, you might meet your goals. Perry, gonna be tough. And so when you're looking at your capacity demand forecast, like I'm either going to need to distribute some of these roles to Kristen, or I'm going to have to call in some additional resources, and then you can figure out how those work for you. Any questions on building the capacity demand forecast? I think this is, once you're done with your H2 reforecast process and you input the information here, that's kind of like the next step from there. Let me see, do I have any more chat?
Nothing in the chat, question-wise. I can ask one though. Can you go back to your couple slides back where you have the metrics,
Yes.
different metrics up? Yeah, this one. So, no, the one where you've got like time metrics, agency,
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Hold on.
just
There we
like
go.
2 slides back. Yeah, this one. So some of these you might have info to benchmark, like ATSs are quite good at publishing time metrics across like different user groups, but some of the capacity ones, like recruiter capacity, like can you benchmark where you're at with these kind of metrics in any way?
Yeah, so capacity and demand, the most clear signal of what you're going to do is what you did in a similar time period, either this forecast or the same time last forecast. Whenever I start somebody off new, I do one, two, three, four. So I have a recruiting, it's another article, I think it's on headcount called Recruiting Capacity Like a Pro. And what it shows is the relationship between uh, job level, how many distinct hiring managers somebody has, how many distinct pipelines they're working, whether or not something's high priority. All these feed into our workload algorithm in Headcount 365, which is why I published the article. But some of these things you can track in a spreadsheet very easily. And what it does is it takes a look at, if two recruiters fill 10 jobs, they didn't do the same amount of work, or rarely they do, right? If you have two inside sales recruiters working volume jobs, okay. But if for most cases, right, an engineering recruiter and a G&A recruiter or a sales recruiter, they could fill 10 jobs each. They're going to have different demands from hiring managers, a different volume of candidates in their pipeline, depending on like how, a head of AI is going to be a lot different than a customer service rep just based on sheer number of candidates in a Utah location, right? So like these things are going to then influence what your capacity is. So I always advise people to go to that article and you can break down your requisitions. We have a way in headcount. I've advised many a different ways in spreadsheet-based consulting that you assign some level of like points or workload system to these requisitions so that you can understand what folks are working on. And in the most simplistic way, you try to navigate the difference between volume and um, specialty so that you have this equality of workload between recruiters. And I do one, two, three, four, right? So executive, tech, G&A, and then evergreen. So in the executive, one a month, and that's still generous, but depending on where you're hiring, doable. Two a month for tech, 3 month G&A, 4 month for evergreen or volume roles, and that should be if you're starting from dead scratch, that's not a bad place to start. Any other questions before we talk about the hiring team requirements? Okay, after every forecast, so once I've understood what was possible before and I understand how we performed, how the hiring team performed, how the business performed, how the funnel performed, I now know what I need to do with my hiring team to have the best possible chance of meeting that demand. So I've never, and you guys might have different luck, I've never been in an executive team and successfully lowered production goals for recruiters. It's a very difficult, you can raise them pretty easily, very difficult to lower them. So how do you get that unlocked capacity without, you know, sacrificing your recruiting team? And it's by creating a partner ecosystem that allows your recruiting team to thrive. So one, interview availability. How do you get hiring managers to fulfill the interview demand that you create for them? And this will also be kind of like a team effort along. If you look at the Science of the Recruiting Funnel article, this is like, how can I get you the best possible candidates with a pass-through rate that makes you think that you're not wasting your time so that you're comfortable with me giving you interview availability that you could just fill up, right? So that's kind of like a relation. That's the purple.io become a talent partner 101, right? Figure out what they need. I have a Unicorn. On Unicorn, you could download the intake session and the interview rubric templates, right? We have a couple pre-filled out. I'm sure ChatGPT again can make some nice ones for your company. I've seen it. And I think, Joe, you might be doing something with Jason Miller on those GPTs he's doing. I don't know. There are ways you can use ChatGPT to create an agent that takes our template and then it populates an interview rubric with all of the requirements from your job. But elevating all of your recruiters to that talent partner status so that they have a trust with their recruiting managers. They could just bomb interviews on their calendar and we're passing through at an 80 to 90% rate, that's what you're looking for. The interview materials go hand in hand with that, especially for your net new job roles. I take net new job roles. I factor those into my capacity calculation. So if your company is going to hire 25 new roles you've never hired before, it's going to take longer to fill out the job description, to calibrate. You're going to do interviews that go nowhere. It's just a much noisier funnel. And so you want to calibrate all that in there. But having your interview materials for every job and having them in a repository, not to continue to plug Headcount 365, but you can attach them to the Recs so that if you have something, you just duplicate it. And if you have something new, we flag it and you can say, okay, this is going to take a little bit longer to fill. And you can create a manual process for that too. And I highly recommend it. The biggest thing that we talk about with hire manager management is a prioritization framework. I don't know how many of you have a prioritization framework that your hire managers respect. It's rare. So much so that I built it into my tool so that you have like a distinct prioritization framework. But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, right? So getting everyone to agree, having some form, no, I've never seen a hiring manager not whisper in their recruiter's ear that something's a high priority. And if you don't have a way, a systemized like, hey, every exec meeting, we're going to review the high priorities, or only 25% of my recruiting capacity can be high priority, you're just going to abuse it. And so you got to set some expectations there. And then lastly, change requirements. So figuring out when a hiring manager can change something without a start date change or with a start date change. Got to give it to them. And so we create this thing in Headcount 365 called the Talent Action Plan. So on those 4 places of the recruiter performance, the funnel performance, the business planning, or the hiring manager interference, how do we fix it? What are the things that I can do to make that forecast get hit and I can meet my goals for the next quarter? You know, realign your recruiting goals, give them send them to purple, get some training, manage my recruiting performance better, right? So like elevating recruiter performance is about driving conversion rate, driving quality, crisp feedback, a deep understanding of what your hiring managers are looking for, and navigating an investment in your team to increase performance is one. On the funnel side, it's crazy out there right now with the AI resumes, and I see every new post is we have 1,000 recs per role. I don't know, Krista, Joe, if you guys are covering that in an upcoming thing, but someone's got to fix that. And until then, you're going to see a lot of noise at the top of funnel, and this is maybe something to talk about as a function of adding some friction at the top of your interview funnel or creating a referral program. Like figuring out how to get your funnel to perform is one of the main areas of the talent action plan. From the business planning perspective, this is just about distributing the accountability back to the executive counterparts about the reliability of the plan, right? I always go back to this. I provide you a service of recruiting. I am as good as the inputs that you give me, and I am objective and transparent about the things that I can control. And so if your inputs are not strong, then my outputs won't be as strong as you're looking for. And then the hiring manager piece, this is the hardest one. They just want what they want, and they generally have I won't say they don't care, but they have other priorities that are, more pressing than whatever it is. So making it really easy for a hiring manager to give you what you need. That's the action plan. So creating one of these at the end of the forecast kind of goes along with, I create, we get the H2 forecast around step 3. I put it in my capacity demand forecast. I look at all my metrics from steps 2 and 3, and then I deliver an action plan at the next exec meeting that says, you've asked me to do this. I've highlighted my capacity demand issues in this form. If you have any questions, you let me know. We could talk about capacity and how to increase it. Here are the different things I'm going to do to kind of drive productivity. This is what I think I'll hit or not hit, and then having some form of check-in that allows you to stay true on that forecast. And I believe that concludes your H1 to H2 forecasting webinar. If there's any questions on the action plan, let me know. I'll pop open the chat if I can find it. It's lost on one of these windows. There we go. We're back. Any questions? Anything you guys want to know about this webinar? Oh, wait. I see some more. More knockout questions. Yes. I mean, 50-50. Who's that? Maria, we've suggested it. It gets received. It varies. The feedback on that one's varied. I kind of agree with it. I was never a fan of easy apply. If any of you are fans of that, feel free to dispute me. But yeah, I think if you track your hires by source and your conversion rate by source, you should have a good idea of where you want to make your investments at the top of funnel. Yeah, yeah, it is. It's controversial. I like it though. We could talk about it all day. I don't mind. I don't judge. All right. Another wonderful group of people brought to you by the best communities in the world, Purple, Talent Collective, Unicorn Talent. We'll send you out a link to this presentation. You can watch it, share it, love it. You can get all the downloads from Unicorn Talent. We'll send you an invite to the Slack community and we could chop it up there. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm always here. Join these communities, participate more. It's TA for TA. We're the few doing it. That's all I have.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Joe. This was a great session today. Hope everyone has a good one. I'll be sending a follow-up within probably the next 24 to 48 hours. So we'll get you all the good stuff in there if you weren't able to capture it from the chat. We'll also send out this recording afterwards. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Bye.